It is so good to be back home at Union Congregational Church and to see all these familiar faces and to be with you here today. Especially when it comes to the call story at the beginning of Mark, I think it's very important to say that every single person is invited into the dream of God, and that the dream of God and the path that we are invited into take many forms. For me, when I was in 8th grade, awkward, in a class of 3, and Stephanie Weiner said those words to me and pulled me aside, and she said, "I think you have a call to ministry." I was highly offended. I was rocking a Houston Texans jersey at the time, I remember, and I had my hair in kind of that vague flipped that everyone was doing in the early 2000s, and I thought I was really cool. And I definitely did not think that ministry was cool. Plus, coming from my minister, I thought that she was getting in the way of my ultimate plans to be the starting catcher for the New York Yankees, so I was just doubly upset. So when I saw that this was the text, I had to sit with it quite a while. And the question that kept coming up for me was, why were the disciples so quick to answer Jesus' call? Why did they leave everything behind so quickly, leaving poor Zebedee standing there in the boat all by himself? What was it that led them to that decision? And the answer, or the beginnings of an answer that I keep coming up with, is that they were actually already on the beginning of their spiritual journey. That they had already been on the process of opening up their hearts to the point where they were able to recognize Jesus on the shore that day. And this kind of flies in the face of the Sunday school answer of, oh, of course it's Jesus, of course you're going to follow him. But that really isn't the story in the book of Mark. In the book of Mark, Jesus is pretty human as well as divine. And in the case of the disciples in the book of Mark, you read the thing and you get through it, and the entire time you're just like, they can't get it right. Even midway through in chapter 8, when Jesus says, "Do you know who I am?" they give a whole bunch of creatively wrong answers before finally Peter comes in and goes, "The Christ." And then in the book of Mark, Jesus also says, "Don't tell anybody. Don't tell anybody who I am." So it's very different than that kind of rote Sunday school answer of, oh, it's Jesus, of course they're going to follow him. Jesus was not this otherworldly celebrity at the time. He hadn't even performed any of his miracles yet. He hadn't even uttered any of his public teachings. And yet the soul within the disciples were able to recognize the soul in Jesus. So, what was it? Once again, what was it about this path? What was it about this journey where the soul is beginning to break into itself? The soul becoming recognizes the soul in full expression in Jesus. That all Jesus has to say is come and follow. And boom, lives are changed, and the disciples continue to get it wrong, but they start the transformative path. And I really believe that this path, this invitation, is not limited to those in a religious vocation. Paula Darcy, who's a famous retreat leader often associated with Richard Rohr, says that God comes to us disguised as our life. So while we often are waiting for this otherworldly sign, God is speaking to us in the here and now all the time. And in this passage, God, in the form of Jesus, speaks to the disciples through the language of being a fisherman. So he says, "I'll make you fishers of people." And I think that this extension of the welcome in the very personal ways is a sign that no matter really what our occupation is, that the call, the invitation is extended to all of us here, all the time. And that's regardless of gender, that's regardless of sexuality, That's regardless of race. That's regardless of how cool we think we are or we aren't. That's extended to all of us, even across religious traditions. But the difficult struggle that I have found since I gave a sermon about The Sopranos when I think I was a senior, is that the path is an ongoing one, and it can be a very painful one. I haven't found that continually listening and discerning the call is a one-time, I'm saved, my life is all figured out, I treat everyone perfectly kind of deal. Instead, it's been a very cyclical relationship where there's been grace of an extended invitation. There has been many moments of falling away, but then there are also grace-filled returns. And as Christians, I think especially today, we are very good at worshiping Jesus' path and Jesus' journey and the disciples' path and journey, but we aren't so great all the time at doing the difficult work of the journey. And the first step that I see all over the book of Mark is this popular phrase that we heard in the show or movie Frozen, let it go. Letting go, letting go. It's very popular with all the meditative practices. Let it go. And Julian of Norwich, who's a 14th century mystic, says that first there's the fall, then there's the recovery from the fall, but both are the mercy of God. And I read this phrase from Julian of Norwich of the fall as capturing the very essential letting go that must occur in order for us to continually be re-invited back. Well, actually, no, we're always invited back to the path, but in order for us to fully live into the path. First, and this is painful, is that sometimes we have to leave our mentors. James and John leave their poor father Zebedee standing there in the boat in order to follow Jesus. And Jesus is, in the book of Mark, having to leave John the Baptist. I think it's very significant that in this first chapter, John's imprisoned, and then Jesus steps out into his ministry of call. Just like the wilderness, the place of letting go, also precedes Jesus' call of discipleship. These spaces of wilderness and the sea symbolize the clearing spaces, the necessary inner work that precedes, informs, and invites the life animated by God. Jesus must face the temptations of the world in the wilderness before his healing ministry begins. And the readers first encounter the brothers in a lonely boat, which I think also very much symbolizes that sometimes we have to be in spaces where we aren't surrounded by the frenetic energy that is being alive. And this symbol of the boat is also used in Mark 6 later on, when Jesus hears that John the Baptist has been beheaded. He says to the disciples that that's the place that they need to go, that that's the place where there's deep rest, because it's a deserted place. Within these remote spaces, which I think for all of us, we don't have access to a desert, or I don't think people would think I was crazy if I was just going out into a boat in the Hudson River by myself. But we have prayer. And prayer is this place where we are forced to turn inward. It's in deep prayer that we face the shadow sides of our lives and ourselves. They often push us to the edge because we have to face what we might not want to see. And when we do, when we still ourselves long enough, when we surrender to that sacred silence that's so rare, then we often are faced with the fact that the way we're doing things, however big or small, just isn't working anymore. And then God invites us to let go. And this is a tradition that's also found within Buddhism, this idea of emptying. But pushed to the edge, these moments of uncertainty when we say, oh, the way I've been doing things aren't really working anymore, that's the moment when Jesus is on the shore. And I love this image of being on the shore. Maybe it's because I was living in Belize where there is sunshine and water all the time, but I love the image of the shore because I think that it speaks to this liminal space this in-between space where we've been letting go in our deserted places of prayer or wilderness, but we also haven't fully stepped into the life of God. The shore is a place where we have one foot on the solid ground of the sand, and then we have our other foot in the expansive, vast waters of creation. And this is where God invites us to meet her, in these uncertain spaces. Thinking about the shore, I'm brought back to summer after my senior year of high school when I was working at the YMCA's New Discovery Camp. Have any of you all ever heard of New Discoveries Camp? Okay. It's a YMCA camp, and the locker room before the kids go into the pool at swim time is literally the worst place on earth. If you are trying to make sure that the kids get to the pool to have their swimming lessons, you know that you have to face some hardship in that locker room. But then finally, when you do, you can witness some really transformative things. And what I witnessed, and I had the privilege to be a part of, was a little kid named Ricky learning how to swim. And Ricky had been passed from 7 homes in 7 years. And he was born addicted to crack. And without any training, the YMCA decided, let's put him in John's room. But all of this led to an amazing opportunity to be with him as he learned how to swim. And when we would go into the pool area, we go immediately to that ladder that leads into the shallow end, where half of it is outside of the pool and the other half is underwater. And what I witnessed there for a few weeks was Ricky, in order to go into the pool, had to go through that same process that we were starting to talk about in Mark. He had to stand at the edge of the ladder, right? And he had to take a deep breath every time. And when he would descend into the pool, he'd get a few steps, and then he would often jump out again, not reaching the bottom. But then he'd start over, take a deep breath. And finally, after weeks and weeks, Ricky did meet the bottom of that pool. And he was standing there on the floor, like for a little 6-year-old, you can't really stand with 2 feet, so your toes are all you got is your toes, and you're a little bit suspended. And seeing that face when Ricky finally hit the floor, that sounds like not a great thing for swimming, but when his feet finally hit the floor, that was something else, and he quickly ran back to the top. And Lord knows, Ricky is probably not Michael Phelps today, but he had that moment at the bottom of the pool. He had a moment when he was able to experience something new. He had a moment when what he had heard about, the water, being surrounded by water, having the water pull you up a little bit, he got to touch that. He got to experience that. And that's what I think Jesus was talking about when he said, the time is now. I'm kind of a call and response kind of person, so can we get one of those? The time is now? The time is now. Yes, all right, another one. I wasn't even expecting that. The time is now. And it's beautiful because we know that it doesn't always last, But it also doesn't mean that once it's experienced that it's gone forever. And finally, in these last couple weeks, I've had the time to read, and because I've been on break at school, and I've been able to sit with Emerson quite a bit, Ralph Waldo Emerson. And he has a quote that I think really captures what it's like to have these moments when you, like Ricky had, like at the bottom of the pool, that you really feel the presence of God within your life. But he starts it by saying, going back to this letting go, he starts it by saying that we have to let go of our fears, just like Ricky had to let go of his fears, that we have to let go of some of our old ways of doing things, but that when we do, we can experience the water. And Emerson says that in these moments, may God fire the heart with her presence. Unfortunately, Emerson didn't say her presence, but we're going to edit it. It is the doubling of the heart itself. Nay, it is the infinite enlargement of the heart with a power of growth to a new infinity on every side. It inspires in humanity a deep trust. They are sure that their welfare is dear to the hearts of all being. It was this deepening of trust that allowed Ricky to walk down those stairs that day. It was the deepening of trust in God that allowed the disciples to meet Jesus on the shore. And with the realm of God revealed, if only briefly, it is no longer enough for me to be fed. It is no longer enough for me to be fishing for my own food. In those moments, you realize that your being, that your soul is tied up with every single other soul. It's enough after those moments on the shore that 5 loaves and 2 fish in Mark 6 become enough for a multitude. When your soul has glimpsed its full expression, you realize that your being can be so much more, and that you can invite others to so much more as well. And when you fall away, which we all have, which we all will do again, we recognize that God is right there on the shore, inviting us back. I want to end by saying once again that this is a very human journey. I love that this story comes in the Gospel of Mark. I love that the disciples never fully get it right. I love that Ricky doesn't have to be a champion swimmer, but that it doesn't mean that there isn't growth, that there isn't transformation, that God isn't working through the process. It just means that our selfishness, our insecurities, our brokenness are known by God, and they are used too. They push us to the edge. They force us to spaces where we have to let go. And they initiate us back into the process. God is standing on the shore. No matter what, God is inviting us to the transformative space. Like the disciples, we are equipped, all of us, every one of us, is equipped with a soul so we can recognize each other's soul. Each one of us has a divine light within us, so we can recognize the divine light in each other. All around us, and I'm so thankful for you all here at Union Kong, because I really see you as my guides from the formative years of my life. All around us are the guides. All around us are the reminders that everyone, each one of us, is welcomed into the journey of letting go. Each one of us is welcomed into the journey of divine encounter. Each one of us is allowed to fall away because each one of us will always be welcome back. And it feels so good to be welcomed back here at my home. And I thank you for letting me stand here and speak about a journey that brings us out of ourselves and into the life of the world.